The garden sat quietly behind the house, surrounded by a short wooden fence that had seen better days. To most people, it looked messy. Uneven soil, plants growing in different directions. No bright flowers, no neat rows. Just green leaves, thin stems, and patches of earth that didn't look impressive at all. It wasn't the kind of garden people admired. The woman stood near the back door, looking at it with clear disappointment on her face. She crossed her arms, shook her head slightly, and said the words without hesitation, "This whole space is wasted. You could have done something useful with it." Her voice was firm, confident. As if what she said was a fact and not an opinion, the words landed heavier than expected. The person who owned the garden didn't respond right away. They stood there quietly, eyes lowered, hands slightly dirty from working the soil earlier that morning. There was no anger in their face, only a familiar feeling they had learned to live with, being judged without being understood. This wasn't the first time someone had said something like that. Friends had suggested removing it. Neighbors had laughed softly when they passed by. Some had even asked why so much effort was being put into random plants instead of something nicer to look at. To them, it was just land that could have been used better. To the person who cared for it, it was something else entirely. But explaining that never felt easy. The woman kept talking, pointing at different corners of the garden as if proving her point. "There's no order here. No beauty, just weeds and leaves. Honestly, it looks neglected." The garden owner swallowed and nodded politely, even though every word stung. They had learned that defending the garden only led to more criticism. Silence was easier. Silence hurt less. The woman turned away, clearly satisfied with her opinion, unaware of how deeply it cut. What she didn't know was how many mornings had started in that soil. How many quiet moments had been spent kneeling there, pulling weeds by hand, feeling calm when the world felt heavy. She didn't know how much care had gone into every corner of that wasted space. She saw mess. She didn't see meaning. Later that same day, someone else arrived. An elderly herbalist, invited for a completely different reason, slowly walked into the backyard. He moved carefully, leaning slightly on his stick, his eyes sharp despite his age. The woman barely paid attention to him. In her mind, the garden had already been judged. But the herbalist stopped. He didn't speak. He didn't ask questions. He simply stood there looking. The garden owner noticed him and felt a sudden wave of nervousness. Another opinion was coming. Another quiet disappointment. That was what usually happened. The herbalist took a few slow steps forward. He bent slightly, touching a leaf between his fingers. He brought it close to his face and breathed in its scent. Still, he said nothing. The woman glanced at him and smiled faintly. Certain he would agree with her. The silence stretched longer than expected. The garden owner waited, heart beating a little faster, bracing for more words that would confirm what everyone else seemed to believe, that the garden was pointless, and the effort behind it foolish. But the herbalist didn't shake his head. He didn't laugh. He didn't look bored. Instead, his eyes moved carefully from plant to plant, as if reading a story written in a language only he understood. The woman cleared her throat, impatient. "Well?" she asked. "You see it too, don't you?" "Just wasted space." The herbalist didn't answer immediately. The garden owner felt something unfamiliar rise inside them, not hope exactly, but curiosity. Why wasn't he agreeing? Why wasn't he dismissing it like everyone else? The herbalist straightened up slowly, brushed the soil from his fingers, and looked at the garden one more time. His face showed calm, respect. Then he turned toward them, opened his mouth slightly, as if choosing his words carefully, and in that moment, before he spoke, the garden owner realized something important. For the first time, someone was actually looking, not judging, not mocking, but truly seeing. And whatever the herbalist was about to say, it felt like it might change the way this garden and its owner had been seen all along. The garden had not appeared overnight. It was not a hobby chosen out of boredom or a trend picked from a magazine. It had begun quietly, during a time when life felt heavy and uncertain. Long before anyone called it a waste of space, the person who cared for it had been going through a difficult period. Work had become unstable. Money was tight. Sleep came in short, restless hours. Each day felt like it was missing something. Though it was hard to explain what. One morning, while cleaning the backyard, they noticed the empty patch of land. It wasn't big and it wasn't pretty, but it was there. And for some reason, standing in front of that soil brought a strange sense of calm. So they started small, a few seeds. Some cuttings from a neighbor who no longer wanted them. Herbs chosen not for how they looked, but for what they could do. Leaves that could help with headaches. Roots that could soothe the stomach. Plants known for calming the nerves, the garden became a quiet routine. Every morning before the noise of the day began, they stepped outside. Fingers in the soil, breath slowing, thoughts settling. It was the only place where the world didn't feel overwhelming. They learned by watching. By reading old books? By listening to elders who still remembered how plants were once used before shelves were filled with bottles and labels. Mistakes were made. Some plants didn't survive. Others thrived in surprising ways. Over time, the garden grew not neatly, not evenly, but honestly, each plant had its own space, its own purpose. Some grew close together, protecting each other from harsh sun. Others were planted apart, needing room to breathe. Nothing was random, even if it looked that way to an untrained eye, but no one asked. People only saw the surface. Visitors would glance at the garden and quickly look away. Neighbors would comment on how wild it looked. Some suggested pulling everything out and starting over with flowers that required less thought and no explanation. The woman's words earlier that day had echoed all the familiar criticisms. Waste of space. The garden owner had heard it before, but this time it felt heavier. Maybe because they were already tired. Or maybe because part of them feared it might be true, that fear had grown stronger over the years. Sometimes, while kneeling in the dirt, they wondered if they were holding on to something that only mattered to them. Maybe the effort wasn't worth it. Maybe the space really could be used better, but every time doubt appeared, something else followed. A neighbor once came by complaining of constant headaches. The garden owner offered a simple herbal mix. A week later, the neighbor returned, surprised and thankful. Another time, a child nearby struggled to sleep. A gentle tea from the garden helped calm restless nights, small moments. Quiet results. No praise. No recognition. Still, the garden stayed that afternoon. As the herbalist walked slowly among the plants, the garden owner felt exposed. All those memories, all that effort, suddenly felt like they were standing in the open, waiting to be judged. The herbalist paused near one corner of the garden, where the soil looked darker and richer. He knelt with care, touching the ground gently. As if greeting an old friend, the woman watched from a distance, arms still crossed. She looked impatient, as though the silence was unnecessary. The garden owner stayed back, unsure whether to speak or stay quiet. They wanted to explain. They wanted to say why the garden mattered. Why it wasn't just empty land. Why it had become something close to the heart, but past experience had taught them that words often fell flat. So they waited. The herbalist moved slowly, examining leaves, stems, and roots. He noticed how certain plants were placed close together, how others were spaced apart. He smelled the air, touched the soil, and closed his eyes briefly, as if listening. Finally, he spoke not to the woman but softly, almost to himself. This was grown with care. The words were simple, but they felt different from anything said before. The garden owner's chest tightened. Not from pain this time, but from recognition. Someone had noticed. The herbalist stood up slowly and turned toward the garden owner. "Who tends this?" he asked. The garden owner hesitated, then nodded. "I do." The herbalist studied them for a moment, his gaze calm and steady. "It shows," he said. The woman frowned, clearly confused. "Shows what?" she asked. The herbalist didn't answer her right away. Instead, he looked back at the garden, then at the person who had cared for it through doubt and quiet mornings. "There is intention here," he said gently, "and intention always has value." The garden owner felt something shift inside them. A weight they didn't realize they were carrying began to loosen. For the first time, The garden wasn't being defended. It was being understood. And the herbalist wasn't done yet. The herbalist did not rush. After speaking, he turned his attention back to the garden as if it were a quiet conversation he did not want to interrupt. He walked slowly along the narrow path between the plants, his steps careful, his eyes sharp and curious. The garden owner stood nearby, unsure what to do with their hands. Part of them wanted to explain every plant, every choice. Another part feared that speaking might break the moment. So they stayed quiet. The woman shifted her weight, clearly uncomfortable with the change in direction. She had expected agreement, not praise. To her, the garden still looked disorganized, unimpressive. She didn't understand what there was to admire. The herbalist stopped near a cluster of low green plants and gently separated the leaves. "This one," he said calmly, "is often ignored." He rubbed a leaf between his fingers and held it up. "Most people see it as nothing special, but it helps with pain, inflammation, and healing wounds." The woman blinked. Surprised. He moved a step farther. "And this one," he continued, pointing to another plant with thin stems, "looks weak, but it strengthens the body when used correctly." The garden owner felt their heart beat faster. Every word felt like a quiet confirmation of years spent learning. Caring and trusting instinct, the herbalist knelt again, this time near a patch of soil where the plants grew close together. "See how these are planted?" he asked, glancing back. The garden owner nodded. "They protect each other," the herbalist said. "One keeps insects away. Another holds moisture in the soil. Alone, they struggle. Together, they thrive." The woman's arms slowly dropped from her chest. She looked again at the garden, this time more carefully. The herbalist stood up and brushed his hands clean. "This is not chaos," he said. "This is balance." Silence filled the space. The garden owner felt something warm rise in their chest. Not pride exactly, but relief. Years of quiet work were being seen, not as a mistake, but as wisdom. The woman cleared her throat. "But it still looks messy," she said, her voice lacking its earlier confidence. "How would anyone know it's valuable?" The herbalist turned toward her, his expression calm but firm. "Value is not always loud," he said. "Some things heal quietly." The words hung in the air. The garden owner remembered the many times they had doubted themselves. The mornings they wondered if pulling everything out would make life easier, if giving up would bring approval. But standing there now, watching the herbalist read the garden like an open book, those doubts felt smaller. The herbalist continued, pointing to different sections. "Here is something for digestion. Here for sleep. This one helps the lungs. That one calms the mind." The woman's eyes widened slightly with each explanation. "You're saying all of this came from here?" she asked. "Yes," the herbalist replied, "and it was placed with thought." He turned to the garden owner again. "You didn't follow trends," he said. "You followed need." The garden owner swallowed hard. No one had ever described it that way before. The woman looked down at the ground, then back at the garden. Her voice softened. "I didn't realize," she said quietly. The herbalist gave a small nod. "Many people don't," he replied. "We live in a world that values appearance first, function second." He walked toward the gate, then paused. "You know," he added, "there are people who would pay a great deal to learn what you've built here." The garden owner looked up, surprised. "Me?" they asked. The herbalist smiled faintly. "Knowledge grows in many forms," he said. "Some choose books, others choose soil." The woman stood silent now, her earlier judgment replaced by uncertainty. The garden owner felt taller somehow, even without moving. The ground beneath their feet felt steadier. For the first time, the garden was no longer something to defend. It was something to stand beside with quiet confidence. As the herbalist reached the gate, he turned back one last time. "Take care of this place," he said. "It holds more than you know." The garden owner nodded. They already knew, but now someone else did too. And that made all the difference. The silence that followed felt different from before. It was no longer uncomfortable or tense. It felt thoughtful, almost heavy with realization. The woman stood near the edge of the garden, no longer pointing or criticizing. Her eyes moved slowly from plant to plant, trying to see what the herbalist had seen. What once looked like disorder now felt unfamiliar. As if she were looking at the space for the first time, the garden owner stayed still, letting the moment breathe. The herbalist returned to the center of the garden and knelt again, this time with a small smile. He reached into a cloth bag he carried and pulled out a worn notebook. Its pages were yellowed, the edges soft from years of use. He opened it carefully. "These plants," he said, pointing around them, "are not common in one place anymore. Most people rely on shelves and labels. They forget that healing once grew in backyards." He picked a leaf gently and held it up. "This one can reduce fever. This one helps the body rest. And this one," he paused, "has been used for generations to calm fear." The garden owner felt their throat tighten. They remembered the nights when sleep felt impossible, when the world seemed too loud and uncertain. This plant had been their comfort long before anyone else noticed it. The woman shifted her stance. "But why grow them like this?" she asked. "Why not make it look nicer?" The herbalist looked up at her. "Because this is how life works," he said simply. "Plants are not decorations first. They are helpers." He closed the notebook and stood. "Beauty that only looks good fades quickly," he continued. "But beauty that serves a purpose stays." Those words struck deeper than criticism ever. Had the woman lowered her gaze, the herbalist turned to the garden owner. "You have given this place patience," he said. "You didn't rush it. You didn't force it to impress anyone." The garden owner nodded slowly. "I just wanted it to work," they said quietly. "And it does." The herbalist replied. A soft breeze moved through the garden, brushing leaves against each other. The sound felt calming, almost like a quiet agreement. The woman finally spoke again, her voice no longer sharp. "I didn't mean to be hurtful," she said. "I just didn't understand." The garden owner looked at her, surprised. There was no anger left inside them, only honesty. "It's easy to judge what you don't know," they said. The woman nodded. "I see that now." The herbalist watched this exchange with calm approval. "There is another reason this garden matters," he said, drawing their attention back. Both listened closely. "These plants grow without chemicals, without harm to the soil. This kind of care protects the land long after we are gone." The garden owner felt a quiet pride rise within them. They had never thought of it that way. They had simply done what felt right. The herbalist smiled. "You didn't just grow plants," he said. "You preserved knowledge." The woman inhaled slowly. "So it wasn't wasted space," she said softly. The herbalist shook his head. "No," he replied. "It is rare space." That word rare settled into the air. The garden owner felt something shift completely. Years of doubt, quiet embarrassment, and silent endurance seemed to lift away, replaced by something steadier. Confidence, not loud or proud. "Just firm." The herbalist stepped toward the gate again, preparing to leave. "If you ever choose to share this knowledge," he said, "people will listen." The garden owner watched him go. The woman remained behind, still studying the garden. "I was wrong," she said at last. The garden owner nodded. Double quotes. "Yes," they replied. "But now you know." The woman gave a small, honest smile. The garden stood quietly between them, unchanged in appearance, yet transformed in meaning. And for the first time it felt respected. The days after the herbalist's visit felt different, even though the garden itself looked the same. The plants grew at their own pace, leaves reaching toward the sun, roots holding firmly to the soil. But something inside the people around it had shifted. The woman no longer avoided the backyard. Instead of passing by with a quick glance, she slowed down. Sometimes she stopped near the fence, her eyes moving carefully over the plants. Her expression was no longer critical. It was thoughtful. The garden owner noticed this change but didn't mention it. They returned to their routine early mornings, quiet work, hands in the soil. But now the old doubt was gone. The words "waste of space" no longer echoed in their mind. They had been replaced with something stronger. Understanding. One afternoon, The woman approached while the garden owner was trimming leaves. "May I ask you something?" she said, her voice hesitant. The garden owner looked up and nodded. Double quotes. "How did you learn all this?" she asked. "About the plants." The question felt different from before. There was no judgment in it. Only curiosity. The garden owner thought for a moment. "By listening," they said. "To people, to books, to the land." The woman smiled faintly. "I never thought of learning that way." They stood there in silence for a while. The air smelled fresh, mixed with earth and green leaves. Soon, others began to notice the garden too. A neighbor asked why certain plants were grown together. Another wanted to know if something could help with constant tiredness. Slowly, conversations replaced criticism. The garden owner never advertised, never explained unless asked. But word traveled quietly. People began to stop by, not to judge, but to learn. The woman watched all of this unfold, feeling a growing weight in her chest. She remembered how easily she had dismissed the garden, how confident she had been in her opinion. One evening, she spoke again. "I owe you an apology," she said softly. "I spoke without understanding. I thought usefulness had to look a certain way." The garden owner listened. "Most people do," they replied. The woman nodded. "I see now that I was wrong. The apology was simple, honest, and, it mattered. From that moment on, she changed how she spoke, not just about the garden, but about other things too. She asked more questions. She assumed less. The garden continued to grow. Some plants were harvested and dried carefully. Others were left untouched, allowed to return to the soil when their time passed. Nothing was wasted. Everything had a purpose. The garden owner felt a quiet pride, not because they had been proven right, but because they had stayed true to themselves even when it was hard. One afternoon, the woman returned with a small notebook. "I've been writing things down," she said. "What you tell me?" "What I learn?" The garden owner smiled. "That's how it starts," they said. The garden had become more than a personal space. It had become a place of connection, not loud, not crowded. Just honest. The woman looked around, then said something unexpected. I used to think value had to be obvious. Now I realize some of the most important things are quiet." The garden owner nodded. "They always are." As the sun lowered, the light softened, touching each leaf gently. The garden stood as it always had, simple, unpolished, alive, but now it was no longer alone. Understanding had taken root, respect had grown. And judgment had finally let go. The garden owner stood back and looked at the space they had once been ashamed of. It no longer felt small or hidden. It felt strong. Time passed, gently and without announcement, just as it always had in the garden. Seasons changed. Some plants faded, others returned stronger. The soil remained rich, patient, and giving. The garden continued to exist quietly, never demanding attention, yet offering more than most people realized. The garden owner no longer felt the need to explain or defend it. They moved through the space with ease, guided by instinct and experience. Each plant was known not just by its use, but by the memory attached to it, the day it was planted, the problem it helped solve, the calm it once brought during difficult moments. What had started as a personal refuge had become something shared. People now came with questions instead of opinions. Some wanted to learn how to grow their own herbs. Others wanted simple advice. A few just wanted to sit nearby and enjoy the calm that seemed to surround the space. The garden owner welcomed them all. Without pride or hesitation, the woman, who once dismissed the garden so easily, had changed too. She spent time there now, not to supervise or correct, but to observe. Sometimes she helped with small tasks. Sometimes she listened. Sometimes she said nothing at all. One afternoon, as they worked side by side, she paused and spoke softly. "I'm glad you didn't listen to me back then." The garden owner smiled. "So am I." There was no bitterness left, only understanding. The garden had done what it was always meant to do. It taught patience, humility, and respect. Not through force, but through presence. One day, the herbalist returned. He walked slowly through the garden, just as he had before. He noticed how certain plants had grown fuller, how others had been carefully rotated. He nodded, pleased. You stayed with it, he said. The garden owner nodded. It stayed with me too. The herbalist smiled. This place is proof, he said, that true value doesn't ask to be noticed. Before leaving, he turned back once more. Never let loud opinions drown out quiet wisdom. Those words stayed as the day faded into evening. The garden owner stood alone for a moment. Looking over the space that had once been labeled a mistake, they thought about how easily people judge what they don't understand. How often worth is measured by appearance alone, and how many valuable things are lost because they don't shine brightly enough. The garden was never meant to impress. It was meant to heal. The woman stood nearby, holding a small bundle of herbs, careful not to damage the leaves. I used to think this space was empty, she said. Now I know it was full all along. The garden owner nodded. It just needed time. As the sun dipped lower, casting warm light across the leaves, the garden felt complete. Not because it had changed, but because it had been recognized. And in that recognition, something important was revealed, not just about the garden, but about life itself. Some of the most valuable things are quiet. Some of the strongest efforts go unseen. And some of the greatest gifts don't look impressive at first glance. The garden had never been a waste of space. Then a lesson, one that only patience could teach.